Leadership Matters. As you are aware, we're usually on Mondays, but we've chosen Thursday today because this is a special edition, a little longer. Before I go any further, I wish to apologize to you. We've been having a few technical issues. That's the challenge with the convenience of being in your home. Unfortunately, sometimes it comes with technical issues, it comes with challenges, and we are waiting, hopefully, to receive Professor Dwayne Devonish in a few moments as he gets certain things worked out. But I am excited this evening as we look at the topic Leadership Reinvented. Leadership Reinvented actually happens to be the theme for International Leadership Week this year. And it's been a tough time for leaders. We know that it's been a challenging period. We've never been here before. We've never experienced such things before. If you were here before and experienced such a thing, it means that you were probably born in the early 20th century, but it has been an extremely tough period. And we want to continue to add that support to give that lending hand to leaders during this challenging period. And this evening, I am excited to have with me Dr. Luz Longsworth. She is here with us, and I know that she has a lot to share. And I also have Dr. Ian Marshall. We also will be blessed, hopefully, with the presence of Professor Dwayne Devonish very shortly as he sorts out a few things. But we are excited about this evening's session and all that it will bring and the value that it will add to leaders. So I want you to do something for me. I want you to share the broadcast with someone. We're on YouTube and we are on Facebook. Share it with a friend. Take a few moments just to start a watch party. Share it with somebody. Share it on in some group that you're in, and let somebody benefit from this evening session. It is going to be a fantastic time with these scholars. But I know this is the beautiful thing about it. The panelists this evening, they are not just academics who will come and speak over your head, but they are very conversational in the way they communicate with you. This evening, you're not going to hear a whole set of theories spouted, even though I know they can do that. But you are going to hear solid, everyday experiences that will truly take your leadership to the next level. So if you are serious about your leadership, I want you to be on with us for the next hour or so. Stay with us as we discuss leadership reinvented. So as I said to you this evening, I have with me Dr. Luz Longsworth, and I am so excited to have her with us. She's a transformational change leader. Virtual leadership is her focus, virtual higher education expert. She has had lots of experience in higher education management consultancy. She's now very focused on leadership development. She's a John Maxwell corporate trainer, conference and webinar speaker, and she has, over the years, dedicated much of her professional life to the development of people through higher education. She's an intentional leader, a student of leadership, and a passionate teacher of leadership. She says, as John Maxwell says, everything rises and falls on leadership. Her mantra is to be authentic because only you can do it. I'm excited this evening to have with me Dr. Luz Longsworth. Could you just greet the audience this evening?
Yes, thank you so much for that warm introduction, Dr. Kenroy, and good evening to all of our viewers, listeners. We're looking forward to an exciting conversation. Leadership is always exciting, and I'm sure with our other panelists, we'll have a wonderful evening.
Thank you so very much. I also have with me Dr. Ian Marshall. Now, Ian is an educator with 23 years teaching experience. He has worked as a teacher, trainer, and leadership development expert from 2009 to present in the capacity as tutor in educational management and administration and research methods at the Urdeston Teachers Training College in Barbados. He is also functioning as the university coordinator for the diploma in education for primary and the certificate in educational management and administration programs delivered again by Urdeston. Ian is an educational consultant and travels throughout the Eastern Caribbean training current and prospective educational leaders in leadership best practices. In addition, Ian works closely with principals and teachers trade unions in Barbados to deliver a number of professional development workshops for teachers at the primary and secondary level. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm excited this evening to have with me Dr. Ian Marshall. Ian, could you greet those who are viewing?
All right, good evening and thank you, Dr. Kenroy. So I invite all, I thank all the viewers and listeners that are on, and I trust that this evening we'll have what can be considered a really milestone event as we go through the various topics under leadership. Thank you again for being tuned in, and thank you, Dr. Kenroy.
Thank you so very much for being a part of this evening's discussion. Now, as I said, we are talking leadership, and one of the things that we have been forced to deal with over the last couple years, well, I say couple of years because it's near 2 years now, is an extremely exciting dynamic that leadership as we have known it, leadership as we have grown accustomed to, has shifted on us. I don't think that it got up one morning and decided it was going to shift, but leadership has shifted because of several factors, several things that are happening, but primarily because of the pandemic. And this evening, we want to talk about those shifts. We want to discuss several matters, but I'm going to ask the panelists at this time to jump straight in. We have made the statement that, yes, panelists, leadership has changed. What are some of those changing trends that you are seeing in contemporary leadership?
Okay. Shall I start?
Yes, you may. Ladies first.
Okay. Yes, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Marshall, for allowing me to go first. I think that, as you rightly said, Dr. Kenroy, that leadership was changing even before COVID. And if we had been paying attention, we would have seen the shift happening. What COVID has done is to accelerate that shift and to accentuate the areas that perhaps leaders and organizations might have not seen, in front of them. So before COVID, we were dealing with the evolution of Industry 4.0, which was really centering the technology and the fact that the automation and technology were already changing the dynamic in the organizations. So what we saw and what we're seeing accentuated now more is that the environment, the workforce, the workplace had some interesting elements. It is the first time, I believe, in history that we've had so many generations in the workforce at the same time. If you think of it, we have baby boomers right now to Generation Z, right? It's the first time that we've had so many because, of course, people are living longer, healthier, and retirement is no longer really a thing. So that was the first thing. So that made it more difficult for leaders in terms of how you motivate different generations. We saw a move towards virtual operations, even though COVID has certainly forefronted that. We saw that people were more mobile, that adjuncts and the mobile workforce, those things were already happening, again accentuated now with COVID. And soft skills, the emphasis on communication, on empathy, on compassion, those things were already starting to happen as the workforce changed. What we have seen, and finally innovation, that employees are hired because of their knowledge or their skill, but they are really kept because of their innovativeness in the work that they do. And again, these things have just been crystallized with COVID. What I think is the new element, and the element that maybe has bowled over a lot of leaders, and certainly I think it came to the fore for me when COVID started in March 2019, was the importance of leaders paying attention to the health and well-being of the employees. and of
Yeah.
the environment, of their co-leaders. That has become primary. And as we've moved through COVID, we've recognized that health, especially mental health issues and physical well-being, have to be centered for leaders to really be able to motivate and to move and to transform the workforce into the new environment that COVID has brought. So, I mean, I'll stop here, but I think that that's what I'm seeing. It is that process that maybe would have taken another 5 to 10 years that has been accelerated in 18 months by COVID.
Okay. So there are several things that you said that we're going to jump straight back into, because I think there are several discussion points out of your opening statements. But Ian, what have you been seeing? What have you been noting? And feel free not to repeat anything that Luz has already said. What have you been noting?
Well, thank you, Dr. Burt. Um, as you quite rightly said, one of the things that and we will not have to repeat it at all because there's several other issues. And the first one I want to point to is that we are seeing, I think it was accentuated by the COVID situation, the need for leaders to be more agile. That was always there, but as
Hmm.
indicated, COVID sort of amplified the need for agility and for networking and for partnerships. And the other thing that
Yeah.
we are seeing as well is that leadership is now moving, or leaders are now being asked to be more driven by a sense of leadership partnerships as opposed to the whole notion of the heroic leader or the single leader. We are seeing more a move towards leadership partnerships. So it's not about a single person anymore. It is about getting that leadership team in place so as to achieve
Hmm.
your particular goals and objectives. And to my mind, what COVID has done for us is to basically say, you know what, if this is an opportunity for leaders to change their modus operandi, so to speak. So that for me is one of the fundamental changes that I have been seeing. The second one, which I will mention quickly, is that as was indicated by McKay and Hannon, the whole notion of leading for equity. Because if it's one that has come to the fore in this COVID-19 environment, it has laid bare the fact that there are persons from different walks of life and who are
Hmm.
adversely impacted within the context of the educational environment. And so therefore, you must now tweak your leadership so as to ensure that you deliver an equitable product or equitable education, as it were. And to my mind, that is one of the driving forces going forward. And I will suggest to conclude that rather than just seeing it as an impetus only for this time to be able, like in an emergency sense, to address leadership, I would like to see in the future that this becomes part and parcel of what we deliver in terms of our own leadership. In other words, equitable leadership should be like the hallmark of effective leaders. And I think that will really put us in a good position going forward. And I'll end there.
Okay, so you again you said some things there, very noteworthy things that are extremely important that we develop. Now we want to pause to welcome Professor Dwayne Devonish. Dwayne, if you can hear us, I'm hoping that we can hear you.
Hi everyone. Dr.
Yes,
Burt, I
yes.
hope you're doing well. I'm also going to extend well wishes to my other panelists. Am I clear? I'm actually using a kind of a foreign device here, but I hope I'm
Yes, we're
clear.
hearing you clear.
Yeah, we're hearing you.
Excellent. Okay.
Yeah, we're hearing you. So thank you very much for joining us. This is the vagaries of technology, but we will operate in a
I tell you.
technological world moving forward, no matter what happens. But good to have you with us. Now, guys, and I'm going to give Dwayne a chance to settle himself. But Ian, you just said something that I think that is extremely important. You said that you would want that these models that are developing, these models that are now trending, that they are not viewed as emergency models. We know how it is. We know in our culture, we know this part of the world, in this part of the world, our culture, where sometimes we're oftentimes very laid back about processes and etc. How we are able to default to what we have grown accustomed to. So it is easy for us to just default right back into what we've grown accustomed to. Are those models, those that what we would want to consider traditional leadership? Is traditional leadership under fire? Is it only because we are dealing in this, let's say probably in this environment, in this pandemic? So as soon as we quote unquote solve the issues of this pandemic and we get back to life as normal, we're going to be okay. Is traditional leadership under fire? Luz, I'm going to ask you. I'm going to ask you that first.
Yeah, there is no such thing as traditional leadership. No. The point is that the world shifted its axis in March, well, March for the Caribbean, March 2020. I think that what we are seeing as leaders, and leaders should always look at the followers and the environment in terms of what their leadership is morphing into, because the fact is that the population, the working population, let's look at an organization, is no longer prepared to accept that kind of leadership after what we've all been going through in the last 18 months, almost 2 years, as you rightly said. And what we're seeing, and we're not necessarily yet, it hasn't been recorded. Maybe Dwayne has some information I'd love to hear, whether we are seeing the great resignation in the Caribbean. But I can tell you that there are many changes in how people view their livelihood. And here I agree with Ian that people are also aware that the inequities are at the fore, and they are no longer prepared to accept that. Maybe some people are more vocal in other societies, but I'm certainly seeing it in the Caribbean, a growth in entrepreneurial ventures, people who lost their jobs. I know for sure that the tourism industry, the BPO industry, for instance, are having a hard time getting people back in, because those persons are now doing different things and making a living and controlling their own livelihoods now. So yeah, it's a whole different world for leaders now. You have to look at how you can create an environment that is going to really empower and suit this new dynamic that people are bringing to the workplace. And that's why one of the things I see, to add to Ian's thing about equity, is that there will be less willingness for people to work for any single organization, and people with the skill sets are more going to be transient and using their skills around organizations. And so leaders are going to have to learn to manage and lead that kind of workforce. In the open campus, for instance, as you know, I have just demitted office there, but we had a large workforce of adjuncts, larger than our permanent staff numbers. And I see that as something that's going to happen with many, many industries and organizations in the future, post-pandemic. So leaders have to look at whole new different set of skill sets to lead a different type of employment environment.
Okay, so we're gonna jump in now. Professor Dwayne, again, welcome, and I'm happy to have you with us. What are the trends? What are the trends you're seeing out there? What are the things that are happening? I know your field is organizational behavior, and what is happening? What are you seeing out there when it comes to leadership? How is leadership trending?
Okay. Well, thank you again, Dr. Burke, for this invitation. Now, I've listened to my colleagues and I concur with everything that they have actually stated. One of the things, though, that I want to underscore, especially in this unprecedented time, is the fact that followers, employees themselves, are making greater demands on trustworthiness of their leadership. And this is very important, not just leadership within private sector spaces, but even leadership within the political directorate. Because right now, in this uncertain environment, as it's becoming more uncertain, there's that need for the trustworthiness. I think one of the things that we have to be careful of as leaders is to place an exclusive burden on employees to trust us as leaders, not recognizing that trust is a two-way process. In fact, we as leaders must find better ways to develop more trustworthiness. I think we have to ask ourselves the question, how can I be a more trustworthy manager? How can I be a more trustworthy supervisor? How can I be a more trustworthy pastor? How can I be a more trustworthy prime minister? How can I be a more trustworthy CEO? We have to find ways in which we can, inspire trust in our membership base much more now than ever, because as you know, there's that correlation between environmental uncertainty and the demand for trust. Employees, followers are not going to follow, they're not going to comply with leadership demands and protocols if trust is not there. We've seen it in the vaccines, in terms of vaccine procurement and vaccine administration, that even the populace, if there is vaccine hesitancy, typically is a reflection of not just trust in a lack of trust in the vaccines themselves, but also a lack of trust in the leadership and the administration of that entire initiative. So it really goes back to leadership. So that will be one of the trends that I am witnessing, observing. Actually, I'm looking to do some research in that vein in terms of trust and how we as leaders, or for those who are rising into leadership positions, how they should leverage trust, especially in ensuring that followers are confident in the kinds of behaviors and decisions and actions that they take. And it doesn't matter where they sit or operate in society. That's my 2 cents, really.
Luz, I recognize you being not in there. You wanted to add anything to that?
No, just that is so important, and I am 100% behind Dwayne about that issue of trust, and it ties in as well with what Ian said about partnering. But I want to give us a bit of a twist and say that what we have to do as leaders now is partner with our employees. I was recently reading an excellent article in Inc. I think the guy's name is Marcel Schwantes, and he was saying that the reason the US, North America, they're experiencing this great resignation movement is because employees feel excluded from the partnership for moving their organization forward. And he said 4 words, please listen to feedback, that employees want to be a partner in the development, especially in times of crisis. And that goes right to what Dwayne is saying in terms of trusting that their feedback, and that was another thing that he found in interviewing over 2,000 companies, that their feedback would be seriously taken and acted on. So I am really, yes, very excited and agree, and I hope we can do some research like that in the Caribbean, Dwayne, because we are a low trust region, as Dwayne knows, right? Because of our history and so on. So trust is so important now as we try to get ourselves out of the economic decline that the pandemic has brought on.
Okay, fantastic. Ian, so I'm gonna jump at you now, Ian, on this whole issue, because we have discussed it before, we've said it before, that we have seen these changes. And again, I don't think that there were gradual changes. If there's one thing I must confess, and I do to some extent feel for leaders in this kind of environment, is that lots of what we have gone through in this period has not been gradual. It hasn't been something that you had the opportunity to kind of position yourself, organize yourself, and say, great, I'm going to do it this way, I'm going to do that, whatever. So the impact the impact of the pandemic on leadership models has been pretty drastic. It has been pretty drastic. So the question that I have for you, and you're an academic, how are you going to begin teaching these new models? Models that have not even been labeled as yet. How are you going to begin teaching these models?
Okay, well, it is interesting that you should ask such a question, because just in the last in the course that I just completed on Monday, I gave an assignment on the 7 correlates of effective schools and the 9 high performing indicators of effective schools. And I asked the question, can we still use these 7 correlates or these 9 high performance indicators? And what the students were supposed to do is to interrogate, okay, in the past these were 7 correlates or these were 9 high performing indicators, but how have they now become different in this particular environment? And what came out from that exercise is that persons were like, sir, but these things are still relevant, but all that is really happening is that you use different indicators to measure
Mhm.
the efficacy of your leadership. And to my mind, that is how you will be able to prepare the emerging leaders to be able to function now in a nuanced environment that requires them really and truly to have a difference in orientation in terms of how they see their leadership. So if before one of the high performance indicators was, let us say, community involvement or engaging with the community, that has now become so different because you still have to do it in the COVID-19 environment. And some of the things that these student teachers and leaders said to me was that they're now being asked them to do things via the technology. So that was just one way in which they recognize that the demands are even greater now because you are in the online environment, but yet you are still being held accountable for doing things as if you were face to face. So what that did is that it forced them to say, okay, how am I going to now measure my leadership? What are the indicators that will say to me, okay, I am doing an excellent job? So the principles will not change in terms of what you're supposed to do, but in terms of the
Mhm.
indicators and the measures that you will use to be able to determine efficacy, those will change. And to my mind, if you're going to teach students the new models, then that is how you would do it. Give them the old theories, give them the old ideas, and let them see to what extent have these old ideas be metamorphosed, or to what extent are these new models now being tweaked to allow them to be continually effective. And to my mind, that is how we have to do it. Specific case studies that would allow them to interrogate, as it were, what it is we did before, what were the standards, what were the indicators, and now, on the other hand, what are the new measures that we need to look at to evaluate basically your efficacy. So obviously, because you're going to be doing that, it means you're going to have to come up with a whole new slew of indicators, new measures of evaluation, etc. So that when you are evaluating, you are not evaluating under an old paradigm, but you're now evaluating under a new paradigm, and that is how you would do it.
Okay. Luz, can you jump in there?
Well, I just want to say that I agree that it's. Am I back yet?
Yes, you're back. You're back. You're back.
Oh, okay. Yes. Well, I hope that was because I was saying the right, and got all excited. But it's not that there are, necessarily brand new leadership models, because what we have found in leadership research, and I'm sure Ian and Dwayne will agree, is that as time evolves, as things evolve, it's usually using different measures or
Mhm.
different emphases, in terms of what's happening with your followers. And so what I see is that the skill sets may not necessarily be different skill sets, but it's
Mhm.
a different recipe for good leadership, using some of the skill sets that leaders have already had. So I give a couple of examples that I've found. When I was doing my research on virtual leadership in higher education, people thought that was, maybe not very useful, because as far as they're concerned, it's the same leadership skills. Indeed, what my research showed was, yes, you use the same leadership skills, but in different contexts, in different amounts. Certain things are more important when you're leading virtually. So, for instance, a virtual workforce is less physical, but they're more present. And what my research showed was that boundaries, and this is way back in, I won't even say when, but at a time when people weren't thinking about, living and working totally virtually, that boundaries were problematic in a virtual leadership environment because the technology destroys boundaries that create organizational, strategy and also order. So we're finding now that boundaries are less clear. We've just heard that, what was it? Is it Norway? I can't remember which country has just said it's illegal for employers to text or email their employee after work hours because of that lowering of boundaries, right? So we're finding that these skill sets, the ability to manage a diverse workforce, you're talking about generations, as I mentioned, differently abled. We talk about equity, we have to think about differently abled members of the workforce being able to work even more now that we're working virtually. You're talking about varied gender identifiers, so you're looking at a whole different way of dealing with gender issues in an organization. You're looking at the transient mobile workforce. So, it's the similar skills, but it's the workforce, it's the followership, right, Dwayne, that we have to follow in terms of how we use our leadership skill mix and how we empower people. I do want to say one thing, which is to throw a little bit of fun into this. As I said to Dr. Burke, I'm the only woman on the panel, and there is some research and clear discussion now that says, the future of leadership is female. And I kind of want to throw that out because it tends to sometimes sound, like, okay, women taking over and that's what they want. But what the research is showing is that the characteristics of female leadership, the empathy, the compassion, the teamwork, and so on, are those characteristics that are more effective in this new environment. So, and of course, yes, more women are moving into leadership positions. But I just like to throw that one out, so in case any of my colleagues want to comment.
So I'm going to go over to you, Dwayne. You just heard from Luz that leadership is becoming girly. that's what she said. So what we are saying, we're looking at it, and I knew she was going to definitely make sure that she got that over to us. But I think that what she is saying is extremely important for us to be able to understand, because I believe, and this is a statement that I made just this week, that the successful leader of the future will be a great facilitator in a virtual world, in a virtual space. What Luz just said resonates, because what she is pretty much saying is that we are no longer going to be primarily obviously administration within a workspace within four walls. Earlier, I remember the statement was also made, I think Luz also made that statement where she said that you're going to be working with persons who are probably more on a contractual basis, not necessarily checking into an office space. So when we say that successful leader is going to be, of the future, is going to be a great facilitator in a virtual world, in a virtual space, first thing I want to ask you is this happening now? I don't know if you've done any research, if there's been any recent research on the whole changing dynamics in the workforce, because we know that there's been a lot of changes over the last couple of months. But are you in agreement with this statement? Are you seeing this happening just before your very eyes, where persons are expected now to manage and lead teams from a remote perspective and in a virtual space, not necessarily on a day-by-day communicating with you? Now, if that is the case, and this is for everybody else, because I'm going to ask you to jump into, if that is the case, will leadership eventually lose its touch, its common touch? Can leadership be in jeopardy of losing its common touch? Dwayne, I'm going to ask you to jump in there first.
Okay. Well, thank you, Dr. Burke. And let me first say, and I will background this in terms of my response to your question, especially your first question. As you saw, or as you heard from my colleagues, that really the same traits, the same characteristics are still in demand, what has changed is the landscape. So when we speak about leadership in person or leadership within the virtual space, it still demands, it still warrants the kinds of characteristics, the kinds of traits that we are all accustomed to. And those traits, consistent with Lou's point about, as you call them, the girly traits, well, I prefer to call them the key life skills or soft skills. And I made this point in an earlier session that soft skills are the hardest skills to teach or to learn. And I think they should be rebranded as hard skills, really, because we tend to reserve technical skills as hard skills, but soft skills, the ability to communicate, will still prevail in a virtual space. Trustworthiness will still be needed in a virtual space. Empathy will still be needed in a virtual space. As Luz pointed out, is how we now apply these characteristics with a different form. Now, why I say in terms of responding to your final question, is losing its touch? Now, I am presupposing that you are highlighting that because we are virtual, a lot of what we've benefited from in terms of leadership in person, in terms of the interaction and the kind of engagement, that becomes much more difficult. Now, I would agree it would be more difficult in the contextual shifts that we've seen, especially to remote working, because I think many leaders, especially look at it within the school setting, a lot of principals and senior teachers are struggling to teach their junior staff to manage the human side of this whole pandemic within the school space or the educational space. And it's not, I would say, owing to any deficiency in these characteristics necessarily, it's because the ICE script has changed. The cast still remains, and that cast comes with the same kinds of characteristics that we were, as I said, accustomed to and obviously demanding. But because the script has changed, now we're moving to different environments, and those environments are shifting, leaders have to be more nimble. And I think Dr. Mark alluded to this earlier. We have to find a way in which we can be contextually appropriate. In other words, in whatever context that we find ourselves in as leaders, how can we leverage our traits to be able to reach our members in those virtual spaces the same way that we were reaching them quite competently in the in-person environment? So I would segue to my colleagues, but I would leave you with that those bits of advice in terms of how we move forward.
Okay, Ian, I want you to jump in here.
Yes, and I concur with what Dwayne is saying. First of all, let me just debunk the myth about the soft skills right off the bat, because again, when you think about it, it is really a misnomer, really, to be calling them soft skills, because as Dwayne pointed out,
Exactly.
the reality is that those are the hardest skills for you to acquire, and and those skills, to my mind, are more about a lifelong learning process. You don't go into a classroom and say, well, okay, I'm trying to learn soft skills and come up with a certificate. Those are skills that you develop over the scope of your career, even, because they are skills that, in other words, you cannot really pinpoint them and say, okay, these are the 5 skills they have acquired, because every situation is fundamentally different. You have 25 employees. They may all have the same issue, but I guarantee you that the way how you treat each and every one of them may very well be fundamentally different, because they come not only with the individual in front of you, but each individual in front of you comes from a space, and you have to understand where that person is coming from before you can even start to engage them in terms of getting them to do what you want them to do. So I think that in terms of soft skills, they are really hard skills, and I don't want I don't subscribe to the notion that in the future we will have more female leaders either. I think leadership is gender neutral. If you lead well, whether you are male or female, it will be evident. So the skills are not in the enclave of any one gender. That's the second thing I want to say. And the third thing I want to underscore as well is that we keep referencing followers. But the point is, in this new environment, if you are going to remain relevant as a leader, we must first of all understand that we're not dealing with followers. We are dealing with creating future leaders. So that whole mindset has to change, because if I come into an organization and I regard my employees as just followers, what am I saying? I'm saying they lack the capacity to be able to lead. But if they come in with the mindset that says, okay, these are future leaders in front of me, I must build capacity in them so that when they move off the scene, they can take over. That mindset allows you to move away from this followership ideology and recognize that they are not mere followers. And in the online environment, they're going to be asked to do even more leading because you are not there. So therefore, self-leadership comes into play, and you have to give them the skills and repose in them the confidence and build capacity in them so that they in turn can lead even in your absence as the leader. That's the fundamental point. Because you are not there in the office when they are at home in their home office. You are not there. So how will you know that they're going to do what they're supposed to do? It means, therefore, is that you must have built so much capacity in them that they are able to be leaders in their own right, right there in their home offices. And that is the fundamental point. So we want to move away from this notion that, okay, these are followers. When you think about transformational leadership says that we are seeking to create after our own kind. And all the soft skills that you're talking about are also included and to my mind are at the very core of a transformational leadership model. And these soft skills and the whole transformational leadership model is what we are moving towards now. And we have always recognized that, you know what, the way to get the most out of persons that you are leading is again build capacity in them and allow them to feel that sense of ownership and that sense of purpose and direction. We can't do that if we see them only as followers. We can do that if we see them as, you know what, you are an emerging leader. You will lead this company in 5 years time, 10 years time, whatever. But the point is, we don't tend to push that idea because again, many of us subscribe to this hero concept of a leader, that all roads, as it were, must lead to borrow the Caribbean colloquialism. But the point I'm driving at is that as we go forward, the only way that we're going to have sustainable leadership models as we would require is if we recognize that even in these new environments, you're going to be called upon in even greater measure as a leader to produce more leaders. And that is the fundamental point. Leaders must produce leaders. If leaders are producing followers, we are wasting time. It is a non-sustainable model. Leaders must produce after their own kind. So a sheep must produce sheep, to use the analogy. You leaders must produce leaders. That is the model. That is the only thing that will work for us in a sustainable way. I've said too much, I think. I'll stop there.
You said a mouthful, but it is extremely important. This week I wrote in an article. I said I said a part of it to you, but I also wanted to say future generations of employees will expect it to be treated as leaders. We are going to face generations.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right now, there are present day generation that we are faced with who will want to be treated as leaders and not just as followers. And that's an extremely important point for us to be able to embrace. So I wanted to say this, and I'm going to jump straight over to you, Luz. Bruce Avolio said something. He argues that traditional leaders face multiple challenges associated with the millennial workforce, emotional intelligence. He said security. He talked about this whole concept of e-leadership, virtual work environments, globalization, and he said the role of women. So he mentioned that. He mentioned those things. I cannot allow you to be in this setting. We all know where we stand with it, but I cannot allow you to be in this setting unless we at least discuss the role of women in leadership. No, I heard passionately what Ian said, and I know before we finish, he's going to go back and he's going just make sure that we qualify certain things. But is there a role? Is there an increasingly growing role for women to be established in leadership, not just within education or those areas that we might want to call service oriented or softer areas? But is there a role for women to be in leadership across the landscape?
Well, absolutely. I mean, women make up generally 50% of the population. So one has to, in an argument of equity, look at that percentage and to say, well, I mean, are they equally represented in leadership roles? And what we're seeing in the Caribbean is there is growth, right? But there is still what is called the bulging middle of women in middle management positions. And then there is leakage in the pipeline so that women are not getting to the top. So what you find is that while you might find that, let's say, the Jamaican statistics show that the majority of middle managers are women, it still shows that only 30% of the CEOs are female, right? 28%. You know, I think in Barbados, the last figures I saw was that there was only one of the listed companies on the stock exchange that was led by a woman. So we are seeing that leakage. And I think it is important, given the research that we've seen, again, coming mostly out of the United States, about the performance of companies that have women leaders as really performing well, outperforming other companies. So especially in this environment, it is important. And, you know, I understand Ian saying, you know, it's gender neutral. I don't agree at this point because we do not yet have that equity. Once we are at a point where we can say that we're approaching equity in top leadership positions, we can start speaking about leadership as being gender neutral. But right now it isn't. And we do know that, you know, in terms of certain organizations, certain companies, that the preference is for male CEOs, males at the top. So we have to have a sort of intentional. Most organizations have to look at the composition of their leadership and to have intentional policies about how they're going to move their leaders up. I mean, Dwayne and Ian knows that there are fewer female professors at University of the West Indies, and you know, we need to talk about that. The women become professors at an older age than most of the men. Why? You know, I mean, the fact is not that we're not looking at equality, yeah, and we're looking at equity. You spoke about. So women have different pathways, and those pathways have not been normally accommodated by the traditional organization. They have to look at how they're going to accommodate that, the childbearing years, the parenting, you know, the caregiving, which often lands in the woman's lap, and it robs the environment of the wealth of experience, expertise, and hardcore skills that women can bring to the table and support their male counterparts in making an organization successful. So, you know, we have to recognize that, and we have to be deliberate about it. We can't sort of take an all lives matter approach. We do have in the Caribbean to be deliberate about it. And even in the US, they're not there yet. I mean, they're still, you know, at 30 and 35%, I think, of their CEOs are female. So it's a work in progress, but we have to recognize it. And women in leadership, you know, some research I saw done by Case Western Reserve University show that the key skills of empathy, coaching and mentoring, conflict management, and so on were women outperformed their male counterparts. No, what we want is not to outperform our male counterparts. We want to be able to ensure and help our male counterparts to have those skills as well. But if we're not at the table, we can't help. So I'll just come off I'll come off of the soapbox right here.
All right. So Dwayne, I'm going to jump to you first before Ian gets the opportunity to respond.
Well, I am here smiling because guess what? I've just completed some research for the IW. This is the International Women's Forum, looking at what we call gender diversity ratio on boards across NGO, private sector, and government spaces. And what this research actually demonstrated, listen carefully, it was across Jamaica, Trinidad, and Barbados. Now, on average, in Barbados, when you look at corporate boards, but corporate boards, NGO boards, statutory boards, there's a gender diversity ratio. And what that means, percentage of women who sit on these boards is around, for Barbados, 29%. In Jamaica, interestingly, is a bit higher, but in Trinidad is probably in the middle, about 33 or 34%. And so those numbers are exactly right, by Luz's point in terms of that 30%. And what we're finding essentially is that women are now not just sitting on boards, but we actually found that there was a rising percentage of women chairing subcommittees on these boards, especially within the private sector. Now, let me just place a caveat here in this space, because while we would want more women to be actively part of our board structures and our committees and so on across private, NGO, and government sectors, I would hope, and I believe that women themselves would also hope that any action to add women to a board or to let's say a top level structure is not a reflection of a tokenism in play. And we know about how tokenism can work. And that's important. So this is what I would go to say to add to Luz's point, that I would want, outside of just the quantum numbers of women being added to boards, I would like to also see some tangible, substantive changes in the way women are treated as leaders. Let me just give you an example. I'm actually embarking on some research looking at how employees, both men and women, view, listen to this, male and leadership. And you know what I'm getting from the pilot? A lot of women, and I'm going to use the word follower, a lot of women who are being led by female leaders are saying that there are some female leaders are toxic. And I'm trying to work my head around, why is it that and they're saying that I prefer to be led by a man. And I want to see more research in this area. Why is it that some women feel either intimidated or they have this belief that there's a toxicity being exuded by female leaders, especially in a male-dominated environment, where, for example, female may have risen to the top, and then perhaps from there, and this is what they're saying, they kick down the ladder. And they're saying, but what about helping other females to come up that ladder? And I think this is something that I've seen even in international research in the media. For example, women, when you look at historically women in journalism and in media, there's been research showing that women have risen to the top. And then when you have subordinate professionals, female professionals who want to rise to the top, there's always this kind of antagonistic attitude. And that's what the research is saying from some, not all, from some female leaders who actually reach to the top. So it's interesting to say, okay, we want females to be in leadership positions, but what can we do to kind of change this perception? I think among female subordinates, if I use that term, as they see and view female leadership. And let me just say one more thing. There's also this kind of pattern that we're picking up, that the kinds of things, let's be honest, the kinds of things that male leader may get away with, there's this tendency that female followers, and we use the word followers here to kind of distinguish from leadership, are much harder, apparently, on female leadership than they are on male leadership. So let's have that discussion. That's interesting. I'll leave that here.
Yeah.
All right.
Very interesting.
I want Ian to jump in here right now. Ian, I'm not even gonna ask you a question. I'm just gonna let you just talk.
Okay. 2 points I want to make absolutely clear. The first is that I acknowledge that there's a glass ceiling in place in terms of the notion of women leaders, etc. But the point I am making fundamentally is that whether I have 5 leaders, 5 female leaders, or 25 males, the point I am making is that leadership is leadership. And the same skills that your ability to be an effective leader is not contingent on your gender. That is the point I'm making. It is contingent on your capacity to be aware of the skill sets, the competencies, etc., and simply utilize them effectively. That is the first point I want to make. So the second point I want to make is that we cannot conflate the two. I accept with opposition that there's a clear differential as it relates to female leaders and male leaders. That is the function of the patriarchal society in which we live. And we are fighting against a paradigm, even legally speaking, from law that created even legislation and institutional barriers that are there to prevent women from advancing. So that is a separate discussion. That has nothing to do with leadership. That is an endemic problem in all societies, because societies were fundamentally patriarchal. That is the point we need to establish. So therefore, we can understand and why we empathize with the struggles of women. I don't want to, for 1 minute, give the impression that it is a female versus a male dynamic. What I'm saying, let me make it very, very clear, is that whether you see a male principal or a female principal, the only thing that distinguishes one from the other is if is the person who is able to effectively deploy leadership skills. Fundamentally, it does not matter. I will admit that while there are some cases where persons will say, well, okay, I find this female principal does it better, but at the end of the day, really the norm across the board. And we looked at some research, across the board that looked at female principals versus male principals, and it showed really and truly that across the board, it is about who is able to demonstrate the skills of effective leadership. So I also want to correct another misconception. The misconception that females are responsible for rearing children and performing that particular role. In this society, what has happened in the last 10 or 15 years is that males have continued to take on a more fundamental role in terms of child rearing, etc. So the idea that we are saying that, oh, it's because the females must be given a better opportunity, etc., because they are female and they are raising children, etc., men are doing it too, because the society has moved away from that model. Men are now raising children. Men are now carrying children to the nurseries. They are working with the children with their homework, etc. So men are on the job as well. So I don't want you to get the impression, I don't want to give the impression, that it is like, okay, we are disadvantaging women, etc. The point I'm going to underscore again, leadership is leadership. Gender does not matter. What gender does is that it may give you a nuanced version of leadership. But when you deconstruct the leadership, you will see that effectiveness is predicated on the capacity of the individual, male, female, or other, who is able to deliver and use those skill sets and those capacities that are identified as germane to effective leadership. That will not change. Thank you.
Okay.
Can I jump in here?
Yes, you can jump in here.
Yeah, I'm not going to argue that point with Ian. I agree that the skill sets are gender neutral, but you, Ian, you said, and I think we can all agree that one learns leadership skills as you move forward. You are actually in a school of leadership. Now, what happens is if women are not given opportunities to move into those positions, then they won't be able to hone those skills. That would be what puts them in competition, or at least in the running for higher leadership positions. So the only point that I think we need to keep in mind is that of equity. And I agree, men are stepping up, and it's wonderful. And certainly one of the things that workplaces, when I say for women and to progress, workplaces need to make sure that they give things like paternity leave, so that the men can do what they want to do, which is to support their parents. I'm happy to say that the organization I led, the Open Campus, was one of the first campuses to agree with the unions on paternity leave. And it may be because it was led by a woman or by women at the time. So, we recognize that men also need that support. So the point is equity, but you have to recognize that organizations have to create an enabling environment for more for women than for men because of our history that you pointed out, our patriarchal history. I want to deal with that issue that Dwayne raised because it's a real sore point for me too, Dwayne, about women supporting other women. And anecdotally, it is so true. A lot of women will say, boy, my female boss has given me a hard time. And many of us have, may have had experiences like that. And I say a couple of things to women about that. One, it again, leadership for women is a matter of learning a process. And for some positions, women are new in the position. They have had to battle their way up, and they have seen it as a fight, a struggle. And therefore, sometimes women will say, well, you have to toughen up. You have to be like how I did, and they, test that is the way they made a success of themselves. I think the good thing about what is happening with COVID is that there is no need for that sort of approach now. That authenticity is what is important in leadership, right? In leadership. And that women can feel a lot more comfortable of being authentic. You see, in a male-dominated environment, you see, and I have to say, none of you here would understand that. Because you as much as you are empathetic, you wouldn't understand it in a male-dominated environment where you, as a woman, even though you might be respected, you are often patronized. You're often and almost unconsciously so. There's a lot of mansplaining, even from men who support you. They feel that they have to explain what you meant to the other men around the table. Those things still exist. And so, it is quite still a process for women moving up. And so some women, I think, respond negatively to other women. Women, you can say women were also socialized to be in competition with other women. But I'm happy that you're working, for instance, with the IWF, Dwayne, because what we are doing as new female leaders is to pulling up the women. You see, you speak about the glass ceiling, and you spoke about the glass cliff, that women are often judged harder than their male counterparts when things go wrong, right? So there is that theory of the glass cliff. So when something goes wrong in an organization, the woman gets thrown off the cliff. But I have my own little theory here, and I call it the glass bottom. Like how we have a glass bottom boat. What my theory says is that where women falter is not having that support within the organization from other women, mostly, to show them what is happening beneath the surface, because men generally have the old boys club. And I say that in full knowledge that is not going to go down well with a lot of the old boys. But women don't. And what women need to do, and what I know I am intentionally doing with the women I am now coaching and helping, is to say, look, women have to look out for each other. Look through the glass bottom of the boat. Look and see where the sharks are swimming beneath the boat for the woman that is trying to move up, and help her. Because that is how organizational politics goes anyway, right? And women do need to recognize that they are sometimes sometimes disadvantaging other women, through the agency. Men use other women, to disadvantage women, right, in an organization. And then we'll say, oh, it's the woman who is negative towards the other woman. So there's a lot of complexity there. Doing happy that you're doing this research. Talk to me sometime soon because
All right.
I have some data.
For sure.
I want to jump in here quickly, and there's a thought that's going through my head, Luz. If the same strength that you spoke of that women may have in leadership, the ability to leverage those soft skills and to obviously several things like that, if that could actually be the weakness, those are the same challenges that could end up being the weaknesses that oftentimes cause women then to find those conflicts in the workplace that are not necessary.
True. And what I would say is that COVID is changing that, as everyone has agreed. These soft skills are now being shown up as not soft skills. They're not signs of weakness. I'm a woman that went through life always trying to be authentic in all of the work I did and being called soft because I wasn't a shouter. I wasn't somebody who would be undermining. But somehow that was seen as weakness. I think COVID has shown that those are not weaknesses, certainly not in this environment. Those are skills that are survival skills now, right? And so I think that women will and are already feeling empowered in this new environment because hey, this is what we are authentically good at. And we can help other women who are not, because not every woman is necessarily good at it. And we can help our male colleagues to understand how these skills can make an organization more successful.
Thank you. Halima says, and I'm reading from the comments, Halima says, the research does not support the point that Ian is making about the sharing of care. So Ian, the chat, I think your comment there has brought a lot of discussion already. Now there's a question here that I want us to investigate very quickly. Halima asked the question, skill sets notwithstanding, how do you situate leadership within existing social and structural relations? So she's saying, skill sets notwithstanding, how do you situate leadership within existing social and structural relations? Dwayne, would you want to jump out of the blocks first with that?
Well, I can probably do that and then segue to my colleagues. So the question is about, bar those leadership traits, a leader being placed in environment or context that, for whatever reason, may either put that leader to be effective or ineffective. Now, this is something rooted in something known as contingency theory of leadership. Now, just to keep it simple for the populace here, contingency theory of leadership suggests that even though leadership traits are critical, what is much more important is the situation or the context in which a leader finds him or herself. And is one of my favorites in the sense that it takes into account that you could be, for example, you could be the most effective leader, let's say in a male-dominated organization, or the most effective leader in the Caribbean. But let's say you were shipped off to China, to an eastern country, to a different country, different socio-cultural, socio-economic characteristics. And you might very well find that the same characteristics that you were leveraging and to become more effective and efficacious in motivating staff, you might realize that those characteristics might not matter because now the context has shifted. So I agree with the point, or perhaps the question that then opens up the answer, that context is much more important when we think about the traits and the characteristics of leadership. And we've made this point in the earlier stage that, there's this kind of time insensitivity that happens when we think about characteristics. For example, empathy will always be empathy. In the 1950s, in the 1970s, it's still empathy. But as I said earlier, when that script, that context, and I think that's what Halima is getting at, when that context has shifted, it requires a different application of the same trait. It's still the same trait, but perhaps a different application that takes into account the culture It takes into account the contextual factors. If we bring in, for example, the notion of female leadership, it may very well take into account the structural and institutional obstacles that have been placed in the trajectory of female leaders, or those rising as females to be in leadership positions. So that is my 2 cents there.
Mhm.
Okay. I'm not too sure, Ian or Luz, which one of you would prefer to
Yeah, I
jump
just
in here.
wanted to jump in very quickly and make the point that that the two are inextricably linked. You cannot separate them. An effective leader operates within a context, and as Dwayne said quite rightly, as the context changes, then you will adjust to that social context or those structural um, context variables. So they're inextricably linked. So you can't tease. You want to say, okay, in other words, you can't say, oh, I have these skills, and therefore these skills are outside of my capacity to function in a particular context. There is an inextricable link between the skill sets you may have or the capacities and the context in which you operate. So, for example, in a particular context, it may require you to be more um, autocratic in your approach to leadership. In another context, when you come into an environment where you recognize that there are people there who have the capacity to do already, you might do more of a laissez-faire approach because you recognize that this context does not require that particular
Require.
skill set. And the effective leader is the one who is able to recognize how to move between the various contexts, applying the appropriate skills as necessary. That's the fundamental point.
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree totally. I think that, adaptive leaders, leaders that are easily able to be agile, I think nimble, we've used those words, that's really what will make leaders successful. And it doesn't even require a crisis like COVID. It can be an internal crisis. It can be, as I think it was Dwayne that said, you could be dealing with 25 people and you have to adapt your style to each and every one of them. What is changing, I think what Halima is saying is right, that our environment is changing. Maybe we won't use followers, but our environment, our leadership environment is changing. And the persons who we are now being asked to lead into leadership, they have different expectations. And that's what we need to really study. We need to really study that and then look at what leadership skill sets, styles will help those emergent leaders to really fulfill their own promise, But I think that the key thing is leaders have to learn. I'm sorry, they're leaders. I know the leader is born, leader is made, discussion. But even if you are a born leader, especially in these very volatile times, you have to be intentional. You have to study. You have to learn. You have to see. You have to read Dwayne's papers. You have to know what is going on in your environment in order to be able to lead properly. It's not a matter of just, boy, this person talks a good talk, or she's nice and you make her lead. No, even if you are then put in that position, you have to study. And I always tell people, I don't want a surgeon who has never done an operation operating on me. So do not give me a leader who has never done any work on leadership and thinks that they can just come and lead me. So that's where I'd like to end. Every leader has to be deliberate about expanding their leadership knowledge and their leadership practice.
Okay, I take your point, Luz, but I also say to you that they will tell you that surgeon is practicing.
Not on me.
They tell you he's practicing, so you have to be careful. So Anne says something. Anne says leadership in the future will need an environment of equity and equality that does not exist today between genders and between races. It has to be an environment where women and men are viewed through the same lenses with the same opportunities. Almost sounds as though it is poised there to be a nice thesis.
Yes, yes.
I think we touched
Well,
some
I
of
mean,
those points. I think we touched some
I
of
have
those
no
points.
argument with that. No
I
argument
think we
with
touched.
that.
Yeah,
I think
I agree with you.
that, but that's the goal. That's the equity goal that we don't, that Ian can happily then say that there are no men leaders or female leaders, they're just leaders. That's the goal.
That's the
But we're
goal.
not there yet.
Yeah,
We're not there yet.
No problem.
yeah.
Keisha says, Dr. Lungsworth, you are absolutely correct. The Old Boys Club is very present. However, women are more often than not, women more often than not do not build up each other. So
That's right.
she's saying that yes, that the Old Boys Club is there, but women are more often than not, they're not building up each other, they're not really encouraging, developing each other towards that leadership. So I want to, we've been here for a while. Go ahead, you go ahead.
I just want to say that, you know, that is an anecdotal statement. And I think that we, and Dwayne touched on it, women have higher expectations of other women, you know? And so it is good that for us to do the research as to whether that is true, that women do not build up other women. You know, we would really want to see how true that is in an organization, or is it just the expectation that a woman has of a woman leader versus what she might have of a male leader. And although I would say that, yes, you know, anecdotally, you know, I have experienced women who seem to be holding you down, but then when you understand their context, it was more like toughening you up, or trying to toughen you up for a world that they saw was a difficult one. So I really would like to see some research in the Caribbean done on that statement that I hear a lot about, women are not building up women. We know that it exists, but I also know that a lot more women support other women than maybe is obvious. It may just be the way women do things, that they're not going to be out there, you know, supporting women the way maybe a man supports another man. But it's worth examining, and we must be cautious, you know, making those broad statements. Because I think that there is a little bit of truth, but we need the evidence.
Yeah. And I also would want to say that women in leadership in the Caribbean context is still a very new dynamic. Still something that's happening, is very new dynamic. Even though, yes, we've had sprinklings of women over the year, it is very new dynamic. And I think that it has to be something that we cautiously now start to do the research. I think that is critical. The research is going to be necessary. In fact, I think the research is going to cause it to become more sustainable with time, and then you're going to be able to reach that goal, Luz, that your dream. You're going to be able to reach that. I wanted to, as we close, we've been here for a while, and I really appreciate your time, and I really appreciate those who have been on with us for the time. But as we close, I want to ask you this simple question, and it's pretty much a simple exercise that you are going to place a word in. You're going to place your context. The leader of the future, the statement that I'm making, the leader of the future will not be successful unless he or she understands. And I want you to complete that statement on that one thing that you made note of today, that you really wanted us to be able to capture. The leader of the future will not be able to be successful unless he or she understands. And I want you to drop your statement in there, your few words, and to be able to explain it to the viewers this evening. Who's going to jump out to the blocks first?
I'm going to go first. Let me go first. Unless he or she understands the leverage of trust. I've made that point at the outset of this session, and I continue to make that point. And when I say we as leaders, or for those who are aspiring to be in leadership positions, must understand that there is no exclusive burden of trust on the one doing the trusting. Trust is a two-way process. Leaders oftentimes beg their followers, Prime ministers beg the populace. CEOs beg employees to trust me. Husbands and wives beg each other, trust me. We have to recognize that trust is not just about the one doing the trust thing. It's about the one in whom the trust is given. And we have to kind of ask the question differently. How can I be a more trustworthy supervisor, as I said before? How can I be a more trustworthy CEO? How can I be a more trustworthy president, a more trustworthy prime minister? These are the questions that we have to ask as leaders. We can't force people to trust us. We have to recognize that there are obstacles to trust, and we have a role to play in facilitating that trust. And we have to look inwardly. We have to look at how we demonstrate our leadership in different contexts and things that we might very well do that may shift away trust from us in our followers. So I'm calling
But
in my very
Dwayne,
short statement here. Yes.
Dwayne,
Yes.
before you conclude your statement, I want to ask a question. Are we talking about
Mhm.
trust across competency or character?
Well, I believe trust is multidimensional. I'm talking about trust across the board. If you look at their characteristics of trust, their trust in, you can trust someone's competency, you can trust someone's character. You can have a situation where trust might be high in a person's character, but not necessarily in a person's competence. So to really having the discussion of trust, it has to be multi-layered. So I'm talking about holistically trust in a leader in all of those dimensions that matter. And character, competency, those are key things that matter. Yeah.
Thank you so very much, Dwayne. Ian must be able
All
to
right, thank you.
understand, he or she must be able to
Yes,
understand.
must be able to understand that leadership is a multidimensional process which requires a growth mindset. What do I mean by that? In other words, if you are going to be an effective leader, you must have a mindset that is prepared to learn lifelong. A lifelong learning growth mindset that says, okay, even if I am a leader, even if I have all the qualifications in leadership, I must still operate on the premise that in order to be the most effective leader, I must be willing to grow. And I can only grow as a leader if I understand that the situations, as situations change, I need to adapt. I need to be agile. I need to be able to flow and to bend. And you can only do that if you have a growth mindset. The problem with many of our persons who end up in leadership is that they don't have a growth mindset. They have gone into leadership and they say, okay, I am now a leader. That is when your learning now starts. It is just like the same analogy of learning, getting your driver's license. You go into the institution, you get your license. But we all know that it's when you get that license that you then learn how to drive on the road. That is a more contrived situation, the whole testing apparatus. And the same thing applies in the field of leadership. That when you get your qualification that says, okay, you are a leader, or when you get your position, that is not the end all and be all. That is where you now must learn to grow as a leader, because leadership is a process.
Thank you so very much. Luz, I was saving the best for last.
Oh, yes, thank you. I would say that if the leader does not realize that leaders do not lead organizations, they do not lead companies, they lead people. And that the human resources that we talk about, we have to put the humanity back in the human of the human resources, because when we use that term, it objectifies the people that we lead. I think that leaders have to recognize that their role is to add value to the people that they lead. So, John Maxwell has this approach, Kenroy, I know that you know this, that says, how can I add value to you today? What can I do to make your life better? And that is the role of the leader. What can I do to improve the life of the people who surround me. I thought Ian was going to say this, so I was shying away from it. But the third thing I would say is really to recognize that the leader's role is to create other leaders. And so I take it from you, but I'm acknowledging you as the person who said it. And it should be central that the
It
primary
should be.
role, people-centered leadership, is about creating other leaders. And finally, they better realize that leadership is temporary, and
Mhm.
that today you are a leader, tomorrow you may not be a leader of that. But if you are a true leader, you can be a leader without being a part of any organization, without being a part of any formal structure, because people are who make you a leader. Nobody else, not you, not any board of directors. It's the people who agree and give you permission to lead
Mission.
them. They are the people who really make the leaders. So that's my final word.
Absolutely.
Thank you
Excellent.
so very
Excellent.
much. Thank you so very much. When we were putting together this panel, I felt in my heart of hearts that there were three well chosen persons to be able to share from a wealth of knowledge, experience, research, and be able to share with the viewers this evening several extremely critical points and directives that we will need as we move and as we carry leadership forward. I believe that we are in the most exciting times of leadership. I strongly believe so. I believe that we're in the most exciting times. We no longer have the opportunity to be bored as leaders. You don't get the opportunity to be bored. Every leader worth his or her salt has been finding themselves reinventing, reimagining leadership on a consistent basis and seeing things from a totally different perspective. We are in the best time, I believe, for leadership. And it has therefore become extremely critical that we take it seriously. And I do believe, I do embrace the scientific perspective that Dwayne has brought this evening to us, where we don't just talk about it in an anecdotal perspective, but we research it, we go deeper, and we move away from just making statements about leadership to being students of leadership. So thank you so very much, Dr. Luz Longsworth, Dr. Ian Marshall, and Professor Dwayne Devonish for taking time out of your schedules to be a part of this evening's discussion. This has been Leadership Matters. It's a special edition during the week, International Leadership Week, the first time we have been able to celebrate this here in Leadership Matters International Leadership Week under the theme Leadership Reinvented. I hope that you were blessed and that something that was said was an encouragement to you and that it can add value to your life. God bless and do have a great evening.